So tonight's program is very similar to the program we had back in Washington in March, in that we're honoring an icon tonight with Jon Bon Jovi. And we open with a young, emerging artist-songwriter who's going to be great. Similar to what we did in Washington, where we had a young woman named Mindy Brash open for Steven Tyler. And I'm loving this format because I think it focuses on the right thing, which is we're here to celebrate the career and the songwriting of someone like a Jon Bon Jovi, and at the same time, we remind ourselves why we're fighting, and that is that so people like Christina have the same opportunities to succeed. And there are a lot of challenges today to do that. Now, Nmpa is 97 years old, but on July 1st, we're going to be reborn as a trade association because, as many of you know, we're going through a modernization program, which means that we're changing and that our support will now come directly from the members of the trade association. And so while it has been wonderful to have token dues of $100 in the past, and we've had that luxury, starting in July, that will no longer be the case. And so we've had to go out and convince music publishers that this is something that they need to support if they want to have a vibrant trade association representing the interests of songwriters and music publishers. And I'm glad to tell you we have succeeded in that effort. Now, as part of the sell, I love to tell publishers about all the things that Nmpa does for the industry. We talk about the lobbying that we do. And yesterday, we had a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee where you got some evidence of exactly what we're doing in Washington on your behalf. We represent the industry in front of other federal agencies and rate-setting bodies like the Copyright Royalty Board. We do things like this meeting where we bring the industry together. We do the Gold and Platinum program. But in the end, probably the best thing that I can tell you about the value of your trade association has to do with what we do to protect your rights. So in my 9+ years tenure, Nmpa has spent just over $35 million litigating to protect the rights of songwriters and music publishers. The direct result of that effort has been into the pockets of music publishers and songwriters nearly $500 million. Now, our sell for this year has been, please pay your dues. And we had the luxury of having 3 settlements already in the bank, which exceeded the size of our budget. So it was a pretty easy sell. You pay your dues to Nmpa, and you will get back more already before we even start the July 1 fiscal year with these 3 litigation settlements. And so while I would love to think that you would still support the trade association despite this, I do think it's worth highlighting, and I thank you for that support. Now, as part of this new modernization program, we've had to collect data that's never existed before in the industry. And I expect to make news tonight in 2 ways. The first is, I will share with you, for the first time ever, accurate information about the size of the publishing and songwriting industry in the United States. And we know that because every music publisher of relevance has shared with us their confidential private revenue numbers from 2013. And that number is just over $2.2 billion. That is the size of US-based revenue for songwriters and music publishers. Now, in addition to knowing the amounts, we also know where it came from. And you've seen these types of pie charts before at the Nmpa annual meeting, but what will be so striking to you is to recognize that today, more than half of our income comes from performance-based sources. If you add the mechanical part, which used to be the dominant part, to the performance, what you see is that 75% of the industry revenue is either from an income source that is regulated by a compulsory license with a bad rate standard, or mostly by consent decrees that lead to bad results for songwriters and music publishers. That's what our industry looks like today. And I expect that that will continue to change, dominated more by those areas that are not regulated by law. Only the Section 115 mechanical reproduction right is a right of a songwriter and music publisher that is regulated by law. Today, it makes up less than a quarter of our income. I expect that will continue to shrink. Take them one at a time. The performance income stream. The most important issue facing our industry today is getting a fair market value for your performance right. And you are being denied that because of a World War II era consent decree that still governs ASCAP and BMI. Now, take one snapshot of what the result has been because of this consent decree, and that was the ASCAP Pandora case that went all the way through litigation in front of the federal judge in the Southern District of New York. Now, Pandora was proposing for the remainder of 2014 and 2015, so for the 2-year period, they were proposing a rate that, based on their own revenue projections, would have led to them paying the industry about $77 million. The rate court decision by Judge Cote, when extrapolated out to an industry-wide number, wasn't much more, about $84 million from one company in just this 2-year period. Now, if you look at the market comparable number, which is $211 million, that is the number that would have happened if we had gotten the same type of rate from Pandora that the industry got, as was reported, for Apple Radio. In that limited window where Apple Radio had to negotiate the value of the songs and have it not dictated to us by a federal judge. So applying the 10% rate gets us to a number of 211. Now, the equitable split number is a number that would be based on a 25% rate, under the assumption, which we'll talk about, that radio is a format where music publishers and songwriters in every other country in the world get as much or more than the sound recording right, and we know that Pandora can afford to pay more than 50% of its revenue for content. Just look at the difference from one company over just a 2-year period, where you're talking about $500 million, almost half of what a total PRO revenue number would be for the calendar year. Now, I want to be very clear. The result in this case was not the fault of anything that could have been done differently. ASCAP hired great lawyers. They made all of the right arguments. The reason why the number came out this way is because we're asked to play an unfair game. It's a game where we can't win. And that's why it's so important that we get back into a marketplace the rights that are inherently unregulated by law and our number one income stream, the performance right. Now, last week, the Department of Justice announced that they are beginning a review of the 2 consent decrees from 1941. There will be a comment period. The department will then take those comments and decide what it wants to do. Any recommended changes will then have to be approved by the federal judges that oversee those decrees. But make no mistake, this is the number one issue facing our industry, because if given the ability to negotiate our fair market rights in a marketplace, then every licensee, you'd be looking at some type of difference between what a rate court produces and what we could get in a fair market. Now, it was pointed out in the hearing yesterday that, by definition, isn't there competition when there are at least 3 players on the field? And the answer, of course, is yes. There is no reason why ASCAP and BMI should continue to live under these World War II-era laws. They should be able to negotiate in a fair market. Publishers should be able to negotiate in a fair market. And if you could do that, you'd be looking at differences for that 52% income stream that look like this. Now, on the mechanical side, our number one issue with regard to this income stream continues to be the pre-World War I law of a compulsory license that's made worse by the application of a bad rate standard, the 801B standard. Now, I don't need to tell you about how bad that standard is. My friend Mike Huppy, who's in the audience, who runs Sound Exchange and does a great job, has told you what that rate standard means. It's below market, it's antiquated, it's government price control, it's not fair to creators. And that's why we thank Doug Collins for what he's doing, because his bill would change that rate standard to willing seller, willing buyer. Now, I would like to get rid of compulsory licenses altogether, but realistically, if we could just get a fair rate standard, you would see a significant increase in the revenue stream from mechanical reproductions. You then look at the 25% that's represented by synchronizations and by lyric rights. And in this area, there's no consent decree. There's no compulsory license. Our number one challenge in this area is making sure that there is a vibrant legal marketplace for songwriters and music publishers. And by that I mean that if anyone is using our rights in the context of sync or lyrics that is not licensed properly and paying a negotiated rate, they should be shut down. And more importantly, we are seeing a disturbing trend of businesses that want to build their business on the backs of music that will negotiate some licenses, perhaps with just the largest of music publishers, and then take a position against the rest of the industry that they don't need your license. We face that challenge with YouTube, with music videos, with multi-channel networks. I commit to you that Nmpa will not allow that to exist in the marketplace, and that if anyone is using your sync or lyric rights without authorization and proper negotiated rates, they will be sued. And if there is a situation where there is a disparity between some that can get a licensing deal and some that cannot, Nmpa will stick up for those publishers that do not have a deal. And I will also tell you that the major music publishers who sometimes find themselves in the position of having a deal have been 100% supportive of Nmpa using its resources to support independent publishers in that effort, and they deserve to be thanked for that. Now, the second piece of news that I expect to make. In addition to unveiling for the first time ever what I think the value of the industry is, I'm going to share with you what I think it is costing us to have a compulsory license with a bad rate standard and consent decrees over our performance right. And take a moment to have this sink in. I am telling you that I believe that more than half of our industry's value is lost because of unfair, discriminatory government regulation. Now, I'll explain how I got here. On the mechanical revenue pool, that 23%, don't even give us a free market by getting rid of the compulsory. Just give us a willing seller, willing buyer rate standard. What would the difference mean? We all can guess about that. I'm going to give you what I think is the best evidence of what it means. Because in Section 114, when Congress established the limited digital performance right for record labels and artists, they decided to split it in half and say that if you are an existing company, you can pay Sound Exchange under the 801B standard. But if you're a new company, you have to pay them under the willing seller, willing buyer standard. Today, there are 3 companies that are grandfathered in and still get to pay under the 801B standard. One of them is satellite radio. In the first satellite radio Copyright Royalty Board proceeding, the Copyright Royalty Board judges who heard that case, which are the judges that would hear any future Section 115 case for us, specifically said that a fair market value under willing seller, willing buyer would have been satellite radio paying 13% of its revenue to Sound Exchange. But because we are using the 801B factors, we're going to give you 6%. So, as we all try to guess what it would mean to have a different rate standard, I think the CRB has given us a clear indication. And so I've taken the mechanical revenue pool and inflated it by a 13/6 number. If anyone has a better guess, I welcome that debate. I've given you my reasoning. Now take the performance pool. There was a limited window, as I mentioned, when some publishers had withdrawn from ASCAP and BMI for the purpose of digital licensing. In that window, Apple Radio decided to launch in competition with Pandora. And in that window, Apple had to negotiate an actual fair market deal with publishers. It has been reported that the result of that negotiation led to a 10% rate, compared to the consent decree process rate from Pandora, which got you about 4%. So, I have taken the performance pool and increased it by a 10/4 factor. Now again, disagree with me if you like. Give me your analysis of why you think there is a difference in what it might be. I'm telling you that for the 75% of our revenue that is regulated, these are the two best benchmarks of what would happen if you took away the bad rate standard and you allowed our performance right to be negotiated in a free market. And you wouldn't end up with a situation like we have with Pandora, where last year, Tim Westergren cashed out more in stock for himself than every American songwriter was paid combined. Combined. Now, I was asked at the hearing yesterday what I thought a fair split would be between the two copyrights in music. And of the 7 panelists, I don't believe that any of them actually answered the question directly, but I did. And what I said is that a fair market would determine the answer to that. Now, I think that happens to be 50-50. That angers a lot of people. But it doesn't really matter what I think. I'm not the one setting rates. If we were in a free market, we would find out the answer to that question. There's no reason to speculate about it, really. There's no reason to argue about it. We don't have to agree as a music industry. All we're asking for is to be put in a situation where fair rules apply, and we'll let the market decide. Now, the one place where both copyrights are negotiated in a free market is sync. And the traditional application has been 50-50. But I am completely open to see what happens if the market actually gets to decide. And remember, the most important point about this is that we and record labels are partners in the same goal, which is that third parties who use music ought to pay more for music. Ultimately, that is the most important thing. And I believe in that. They should pay maximum amount for music. But it should be done in a market setting. And then, once you know what that maximum amount is, it does have to be split. And that should be resolved using at least rules that are fair to both copyrights. Now, on the label side, they're asked to play by some unfair rules too. And I've said this before, and I'll repeat it again. It is an absolute crime that they are not paid by broadcast radio for the performance right. They deserve to be paid for pre-72 recordings. And their rate standard in Section 114 ought to be raised to willing seller and willing buyer across the board. I believe that. But ultimately, let's just let the market decide where it would be. But I am telling you, I think that is how much we are losing as an industry. And so I want to thank you in this room for joining me in this effort to get the rate standard increase with Doug Collins' bill and to participate in the discussion about what to do about these consent decrees so that ASCAP and BMI can play by fair rules and that you as property rights owners can get a fair market value for your rights in a performance market. Now, let me end by thanking a few people, because obviously we do this with a lot of help. And first, I'd ask the Nmpa Board of Directors to please stand, and I'd like you all to help thank them for what they do. This is a group of 18 men and women. By definition, 14 of them are independent music publishers. They each have equal votes on my board, and they're elected every 2 years by you, the membership. But their service comes at a great cost. We ask a lot of their time. We ask a lot of their wallet when it comes to our PAC. And so they do sacrifice quite a bit to be board members, and I thank them for that. I also want to thank Michael Simon and the entire staff of HFA, who in a very challenging environment are doing a great job reforming that organization. If you would please stand, the HFA employees and Michael Simon. They are addressing what is happening in the marketplace and really doing everything they can to make HFA a great organization that it is. And then finally, I'd like to thank my own staff, if they would please stand, and if you could acknowledge their work. And you should know that this entire production, we don't use an outside production company. We don't have outside consultants. It's really done mostly by the efforts of one woman who happens to be 9 months pregnant. And so if you would thank Jamie Murata is also doing this.